Hydra. The Hydra does not give you a second chance. It gives you a worse first one. This creature inhabited the swamps of Lerna, near Argos, and it was not simply dangerous the way most monsters are dangerous. It was specifically designed to punish the instinct that keeps heroes alive, the instinct to fight back, cut off one head, and two grow in its place. Every attack made things worse. Every correct decision became the wrong one. Heracles arrived with his nephew Iolaus and discovered almost immediately that brute force was not going to work here. The solution had to be invented in the middle of the fight, under pressure, while a 9-headed serpent was actively trying to kill him. Cauterize each neck with fire immediately after cutting, before the regrowth begins. Scholars have noted that the Hydra may encode early Greek thinking about disease, infections that spread faster when treated incorrectly, a monster that worsens under the wrong intervention. Heracles survived. But the myth is careful to note, only barely. Medusa. Medusa does not need to move. She does not need to strike. She does not need to choose her victims. Anyone who looks directly at her face turns to stone. The kill is passive. The threat is simply her existence in the same space as yours. She was not always this way. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, written around 8 CE, Medusa was originally a mortal woman, transformed into a gorgon by Athena as punishment. The justice of that transformation has been debated for 2,000 years. By the time Perseus was sent after her, her cave was already surrounded by the stone figures of men who had tried before him. Heroes, warriors, all of them, frozen mid-strike. Perseus survived by never looking at her directly. He used a polished bronze shield as a mirror, navigated the approach blind, made the kill without once turning his eyes toward the target. The method matters. It tells you something about what kind of danger Medusa actually was. She was not a test of strength. She was a test of whether you could refuse the most human impulse, the compulsion to look at something terrifying. Perseus refused. Everyone else did not. The Sphinx. The Sphinx killed with a question. She sat on a rock outside Thebes, imposed a single riddle to every traveler attempting to enter the city. Those who answered incorrectly were devoured, every one of them. Before Oedipus, no one had answered correctly. The riddle: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? The answer is a human being, crawling as an infant, walking upright as an adult, using a staff in old age. The Sphinx was asking travelers to define themselves, and killing everyone who failed. What separates her from almost everything else on this list is the precision of her rules. She posed no physical threat to someone who answered correctly. She was bound by her own logic. When Oedipus gave the right answer, she threw herself from the cliff, because a Sphinx whose riddle is solved cannot continue to exist. The Greeks built a monster that enforced its own defeat the moment someone was clever enough to deserve it. Oedipus survived the Sphinx. What came after is a different story entirely. Scylla. Scylla never moved from her cliff. She did not need to chase anyone. She did not need to hunt. She simply occupied a specific stretch of water, and every ship that passed through the Strait of Messina had to pass within reach of her 6 heads. Each head sat atop a long serpentine neck. Each mouth held 3 rows of teeth. She was anchored to the rock by 12 tentacle-like legs, and she was immortal. There was no killing her, no defeating her, no rerouting around her. The strait was the only passage, and she was part of the strait. Odysseus faced a choice that had no correct answer. Sail close to Scylla and lose 6 men, 1 to each head, with certainty, or sail close to Charybdis, the whirlpool on the other side, and risk losing the entire ship. He chose Scylla, watched 6 of his crew pulled screaming from the deck, called them by name as they died. Homer records that moment with unusual care. Odysseus does not look away. He watches, because he made the decision, and the least he could do was witness the consequence. Scylla was never defeated. She is still there in the myth, waiting. The ship simply stopped sailing that route. Charybdis, where Scylla was visible. Charybdis was nothing, no body, no face, no target, just an enormous mouth at the surface of the sea that swallowed vast quantities of water 3 times each day and expelled them in violent surges, a whirlpool large enough to pull entire ships under. She had been a naiad once, a water nymph, daughter of Poseidon, transformed by Zeus as punishment for flooding land she had claimed for her father's kingdom. What she became had no form you could fight and no weakness you could find. Odysseus survived his first crossing by sailing close to Scylla instead. On the return, alone now, his entire crew dead, he was caught in the vortex. He survived by grabbing the branch of a fig tree overhanging the water, held there above the churning sea until the surge expelled the wreckage of his raft below him. He climbed back down onto the wreckage and kept moving. That is the entire margin between Odysseus and oblivion. One branch, one moment of timing, one man's grip, holding just long enough. The phrase between Scylla and Charybdis passed into European languages as an idiom for impossible choice. It remains in use today, in boardrooms, in politics, in everyday conversation, by people who have never read Homer and have no idea where the phrase came from. The Greeks embedded a navigation problem in their mythology, and the expression outlasted the civilization that created it. The Nemean Lion. Before the Hydra, before any of the other labors, there was this. The Nemean Lion was Heracles' first task, and it should have been the simplest. It was a lion. Heracles had weapons. The gap between those two things should have been brief. It was not. The Nemean lion's hide was impenetrable. Arrows bounced off it, swords bent against it. Every conventional weapon was useless. The creature could not be killed by any blade or any projectile, which meant the only way to kill it was to get close enough to use bare hands. Heracles strangled it. The solution, like the Hydra solution, had to be invented under pressure after every prepared strategy had already failed. He spent days tracking it, days watching his weapons accomplish nothing. Then he got close enough to wrap his arms around its neck and held on. He skinned it afterward using the lion's own claws, the only material sharp enough to cut through its own hide. He wore that skin for the rest of his life as armor. The Nemean lion never spoke, never had a weakness to discover, never made a mistake. It simply could not be hurt until Heracles found the one method that worked. And the myth does not pretend he knew it would work going in. Fenrir. Every monster on this list was defeated eventually, or at least contained. Fenrir has not been defeated yet. In Norse mythology, Fenrir is the monstrous wolf, son of Loki, sibling to Jörmungandr and Hel. He was raised among the Aesir gods who recognized his potential for destruction and attempted to bind him, twice, with iron chains, Ladon, then Dromi, both of which he broke without visible effort. The third binding was different. Gleipnir was made not from iron, but from things that do not exist. The sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. 6 impossible ingredients, woven into something that looked like a silk ribbon and felt like nothing at all. Fenrir agreed to be bound by it, only if one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth as a guarantee of good faith. Tyr stepped forward. When Fenrir could not free himself, he bit off Tyr's hand. He has been bound ever since, on an island called Lyngvi, a sword propped in his jaw to hold it open, waiting. At Ragnarok, the prophesied end of all things, he will break free. He will kill Odin, the All-Father, the highest of all Norse gods, and then he will be killed in turn by Odin's son Vidar. The Norse were not telling a story about good defeating evil. They were telling a story about a wolf that wins, and the world ending anyway. Fenrir is the only creature in world mythology that is simultaneously imprisoned and prophesied to win. Jörmungandr. Jörmungandr does not need to find Thor. At the end of the world, Thor will come to it. The world serpent lies in the ocean surrounding Midgard, so enormous it encircles the entire earth and bites its own tail to close the loop. It was cast there by Odin while it was still small enough to be thrown, which tells you how early the gods recognized the problem and how little that recognition helped them. Thor and Jörmungandr have met before. Thor nearly pulled it from the ocean on a fishing expedition. The giant Hymir cut the line before Thor could finish what he started. They have fought before. Every encounter between them ends without resolution. At Ragnarok, they will fight for the last time. Thor will kill the serpent. Then he will take 9 steps and fall dead from its venom, already working through him from the moment the fight began. 9 steps. The Norse were precise about this. Not immediately. not after a long decline, 9 steps. And then the thunder god dies. That specificity is not accidental. It suggests a myth that was worked out deliberately, the way you work out something you have been thinking about for a very long time. The Lernean dragon, Ladon. Most creatures on this list were monsters in the obvious sense. Ladon was not. He was the dragon that guarded the golden apples in the garden of the Hesperides. Coiled around the tree at the edge of the world, never sleeping, never leaving, never failing in what he had been placed there to do. Some accounts give him 100 heads. Others describe him as a single enormous serpent. What every account agrees on is this: no one had ever gotten past him. Heracles was sent to retrieve 3 of the golden apples as his 11th labor. What happened to Ladon is told differently across sources. Some say Heracles killed him, others that he simply went around. What is consistent is the aftermath. After the encounter, Ladon was placed in the sky as the constellation Draco, the eternal guardian, still coiled around the pole star, still performing his function, even in death. The Greeks did something unusual with Ladon. They did not celebrate his defeat. They commemorated him. A monster that did his job perfectly, loyal, tireless, present, was given a place in the stars that heroes were not. That is not how most monster stories end. Conclusion: what connects all of them is not size, not strength, not the number of heads or the reach of the claws. It is that each one required its opponent to solve a problem that had never been solved before, using a method that did not yet exist, under conditions where failure was permanent. The heroes who survived did not survive because they were stronger. They survived because they were faster than their own instincts. The ones who didn't, and there were many, are remembered only as the stone figures surrounding Medusa's cave, the travelers the Sphinx devoured before Oedipus arrived. The 6 men Odysseus watched die, one by one, from Scylla's reach. Mythology kept their names out of it. It only kept the creatures. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.